Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 47 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian starting my 13th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself and my interview guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special hello this week to listeners, Alana in Germany, Melissa in Connecticut, Casey in Washington, D.C., Tara in Tennessee, and Trill, who is an elementary school librarian in Anchorage, Alaska. I would also like to thank Amanda in Louisiana, who suggested I interview a certain leader in our field, and thanks to her, I will be sharing that interview with listeners very soon. I welcome all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions, and yes, recommendations for interviews, either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Before we launch into today's interview, I wanted to throw something out there for consideration. I received an email from my children's school district this week. It was from the Wayne County's Office of the Prosecuting Attorney, Kim Worthy. Wayne County encompasses Detroit and many surrounding communities. It was addressed to parents. I won't read the entire letter, but I'd like to quote some of the more salient passages. While I am a parent, I also read this as an educator and as a school librarian. To me, this letter was a call to action for digital citizenship. See if you have the same reaction. This letter was dated September 12, 2019, but I will say I got it this week. So I'm not sure what the delay was, but I'm really glad to see it. I just wasn't sure why there was such a gap in when the letter was written and when it was emailed to us. I'll quote the letter. Dear Parent/Guardian, with a new school year beginning, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office is encouraging all parents/guardians to have a conversation with your school-age children regarding an issue that has become all too prevalent, namely threats to commit school violence. And I'll skip a few sentences. Experience has taught us that the publicity of these school shooting events often prompts a small subset of students to make similar type threats against their schools, teachers, and/or fellow classmates. In these cases, the student who makes the threat tells investigators that they were, quote, just joking, and seem genuinely shocked by how serious the consequences are for making the threat. Often they make the threat thinking that it is not a big deal as long as they did not plan to actually carry it out. Michigan law, however, makes it a crime to make a threat even if the person making the threat did not have the intent or capability of actually carrying it out. Skipping a few more sentences. Please talk with your children. Help them understand that their words can have lifelong consequences. Students can be charged with crimes such as false threat of terrorism or threat of terrorism. A new law enacted last year also makes it a crime to threaten to commit violence against students or employees on school property. These crimes can result in sentences up to 10 to 20 years in prison for an adult. It is worth noting that many seniors in high school are already 17 or older, which legally makes them an adult in the state of Michigan. In addition to the potential legal consequences, such charges may affect a student's ability to get federal financial aid for college, cause them to lose college scholarships, cause them to be denied college admission, and result in them having to disclose pending cases or criminal convictions on job applications. Skipping a few sentences. Therefore, it is critical that you also encourage your children to report any threats that they hear about, including threats posted via social media, texts, emails, etc., so that these tragic situations can be prevented before they have a chance to start. As I said, I read that first as a parent, then as an educator, and then I really looked at it as a school librarian who teaches digital citizenship. Do you include such warnings in your digital citizenship lessons? Our curriculum addresses the responsible use of the internet, and I feel that this particular concern expressed by the prosecuting attorney falls squarely into that category. Obviously, we have to all account for age appropriateness of our students and the content, but I feel telling my students that everything we do online is permanent and that we can't take back what we share on the internet, and making jokes which may seem ha-ha funny but could be interpreted differently should never be shared online. And I also include that not only are they potentially violating the student code of conduct, which applies to all students regardless of which building they are in at the time, that they're also violating Michigan state laws. Do I think 4th and 5th grade is too young to be addressing something like threats on social media? Absolutely not. I think it's the perfect time to be addressing this kind of serious issue because I can be fairly certain that my students haven't made that mistake yet. Can the same be said of our middle school students? No. I think that if you talk to students in the 4th or 5th grade about just how serious a crime it is to threaten their students or their school or their teachers, thinking that it's just a joke, is not one that anybody ever takes lightly. So taking this to its logical conclusion, and how does it relate to school librarians? Well, it does, because as we all know, our roles as educators in the schools are sometimes underappreciated or underestimated, or oftentimes the scope of what we teach in our library lessons isn't always understood. And the fact is that digital citizenship in my district encompasses the responsible use of the internet. And I always teach my students that using social media to make inappropriate jokes that could be misconstrued is never appropriate. And isn't this something that my principal should know about? I suppose on the one hand, I felt this letter was very validating. On the other hand, I wanted to sort of jump up and shout and say, wait a minute, I do teach this in my 4th and 5th grade lessons. So I'm not sure. I sort of threw that out there because I really do feel like it pinpoints just how important our roles are in the schools, and at the same time identifying a need to communicate that better to the families. And now for today's interview with EdTech Trailblazer, Nikki D. Robertson. I was especially excited to share this conversation with listeners because Nikki's journey as a school librarian has more resembled an adventure with many twists and turns. She brings a wealth of experience and an insight from those of us who've not been able to ever see her present in person. I hope that this podcast episode is the next best thing. And now here's my conversation with Nikki D. Robertson. Nikki, can you tell me how long have you been a school librarian, and tell me a little bit about your journey in becoming a school librarian?
Most definitely. Well, this is my 28th year in the education realm. I started out as a 5th and 6th grade teacher, and then in 97, I started my first library position, and so that was really cool to do that. I didn't know I was going to go into libraries. I've worked in elementary and high school. I've skipped 7th and 8th grade, though. So, much love to my middle grade librarians. What led me to it, it was just one of those fluke things. But then when you look back on it, life was preparing you the whole way. So what I mean by that is when I was a little kid, both my parents were English teachers, and we had books. And so when I was a little kid, I had a room just stuffed with books. And so I would go and put like a little checkout thing on the back of the book so that I could check the books out to the kids in the neighborhood, and they'd come to my room, and that was the neighborhood library. And then fast forward to being in elementary school, it was right across the street from where my mother taught high school. So I would spend my mornings and my afternoons in the high school library, helping out, And then, I mean, it went on from there through my whole schooling career. And it never
Wow. Well, the signs were all
meshed.
there and it all came together. Your website said that you're retired, and I couldn't believe that because it seems to me like you still are very much a leader in the library world. So could you tell me about how you went from being a school librarian to where you are today?
Right. So I did retire 2 years ago. I retired from Alabama and then ended up coming to Texas quite unexpectedly and continued being a librarian here for the last 2 years. And then I had an opportunity for a job with the Education Service Center as their project coordinator for digital learning, which is right up my alley because I love all things EdTech. And I felt like I could reach even more people at the service center level than just the people within my own school. Because, we serve over 60 school districts and charter schools and private schools and universities and colleges. And I'm kind of the one who gets to pull in all that digital learning. But I also still work with libraries. I do maker spaces. I do STEAM and STEM activities. So I'm still very much involved in a lot of different aspects of schools and school libraries.
Well, I can imagine that given your background in libraries, it only helps you in this job because you have this better appreciation for what librarians certainly are capable of doing. The rest of the world may not know all that our jobs and our training entails, but you do. And so you come at it from that perspective.
Here's the crazy thing that I don't think a lot of people really get is, as librarians, we have always been the ones on the cutting edge of technology. Back when the overhead projector came in, we were the ones who'd roll it down to the classrooms and teach the teachers how to use it and connect it to their curriculum. When the smart boards came in, when you remember the film strip projectors with the big reels and they go, and you had to be like, press that. We were the ones. Yeah. We were always the ones. But somewhere along the way, when the technology wasn't attached to a cart and wheels, suddenly people are like, oh, well, who's going to take care of all this technology? And we're like, we're here. We've been here the whole time. This is kind of our gig.
Well, and that leads me to my next question, because you are self-described as the incredibly true adventures of the EdTech Trailblazer. And so I really find that to be a great way to take a piece of reflection where you've really seen where your strengths lie and what you bring to the profession. Can you tell me a little bit more about how being a librarian has shaped you as being an EdTech leader?
Well, I think as a librarian, all of us have now, especially with the way technology has moved forward and with one-to-one initiatives and more devices coming into our schools, it's kind of our natural role. Mm-hmm. And we need to start stepping up as the professional development leader in our schools.
Agreed.
Your principals, your administrators are worried about how am I going to make sure that these devices we have are being utilized, that the money we're putting into it is worth what we're doing, and is it going to be connected to the curriculum, or is this device going to be kept under the desk until it's they're done with their work and now you can take it out? And we're the people in the school who we know our teachers, we know our students, we know the curriculum, and we're the ones who can connect those devices with the curriculum and then help teach teachers how to use those devices in their classrooms.
That I agree. And I think, unfortunately, we also have to be the advocates to remind people that that's our job. So
true story.
I was interested. I read that you're the past president of ISTE Librarians Network. So how did you move into that leadership role with ISTE? I know that you've presented there many times.
It's the bad influence of your friends is what got me there. So, I have built over the years since 2010 when I first started really I left being a burned out librarian and had this new spark ignited in me. And working to connect, become a connected educator, meeting people online, developing very close friendships, and then having those collaborative opportunities open this opportunity for me. I might have gone, I'm not going to say I did, but I was probably kicking and screaming a little bit along the way to this position, because that's a really big thing to do. But all along the way, the things that I've done that seem really scary, and they are scary, and they seem like they're just huge things, and how could you even accomplish it? I haven't done any of that alone. The most fabulous thing about the school library community is people are always there for you, and you're not doing anything alone, because you have this whole group of people who are there to support and love you and help you any way they can.
Well, and especially, and it's something that I've discovered through this podcast, is that we don't have to work in the same district to support one another. We don't have to live in the same state or be in the same time zone. I have had the wonderful surprise is that I've been able to connect with librarians all over the country, and I'll be honest, there are quite a few around the world. I have international stamps in my drawer, because I send letters around the world now, which I never did before before I had a podcast. So I appreciate that our support doesn't necessarily come from the immediate space around us, and we're talking more about our professional learning network and the people that we choose to surround us. Just because we aren't, a large team of educators, doesn't mean we can't find that source of support using social media, using podcasts, using a blog that you have, and going to wonderful conferences like ISTE and all of those affiliates at our state level. I noticed that, and you mentioned that you're a coordinator for digital learning, and that's done at the state level. Are you working in conjunction with the School of Education or the Department of Education? Is it a corporate entity?
Well, it's the Education Service Center. In Texas, we have the state's divided into 20 education service centers. And so those service centers provide a wide range of services to schools, from instructional coaches to networking, technology like myself, special education, training of administrators like superintendents and principals, and bus drivers and custodians, and every single aspect of a school. And so, this was my little niche that I happened to get a job in. My wife actually found the job for me. I wasn't looking for a job. I was perfectly happy where I was, but she was looking for a job, and she came across the description, and she just looked at me and was like, "I just found your job for you." And I'm like, I'm not looking for a job. I'm happy where I am. And she's like, no. You have to apply for this. This job is yours. This is you and your job. And she's done that several times throughout our relationship. And she has this intuition. And I was like, okay, I'll apply for it. And I got it.
Sometimes people who love us, they know us better than we know ourselves.
They do. It's just so weird how it happened.
Was that also part of the decision to you writing a book? I haven't interviewed an author yet, so here I've interviewed a children's author, but in terms of a professional manual, can you tell me what inspired you to go down this path of being an author?
And it's a crazy story. And again, it goes back to your being a connected educator and having that supportive PLN. Mm-hmm. And actually, my friend Tiffany Whitehead had written out the premise of the book and kind of a rough outline and presented it to ISTE of, hey, is this something you'd be interested in, that you'd want a book written about? And then I forget the name of the hurricane, but the hurricane came through. She's in Baton Rouge, and her house was flooded. Her parents' house was flooded, and there was just no way, with the devastation and what they were having to deal with, that she could write the book and meet the deadline. Mm-hmm. And so she asked me if I would pick up her baby and carry it through to
Oh, what a generous,
kind of
what a generous
surrogate.
offer.
Right. And it's very generous. For her to think of me just, to this day makes me want to cry, because that means, she believed in me. And that's the big thing about the people around you. They believe in you and they're going to push you forward, even though they don't, even though you might not think you have it in you, they see that you have it in you.
Well, and I think
And
that
so,
also speaks to the fact that school librarians aren't selfish. We believe in supporting and raising up others around us. And if that means what you do raises other people up, if my efforts support people who listen to my podcast, then mission accomplished. So it's not unheard of. I think we tend to be a very generous group, and we want to see others around us succeed, whether it's our students succeeding or our teachers succeeding or fellow librarians who may not even be anywhere near us succeeding. Could you tell us the title of your book? I know that it came out in 2017, and it really is a great premise. And I know that it's gotten great reviews, especially by school librarians online who have commented on it.
Oh, that's awesome. So the name of the book is rather long. ISTE came up with the name, so when you ask me what the title is, I'm kind of like, hold on, let me see. But it's Connected Librarians, which we've already just been talking about how important that is. So Connected Librarians tap social media to enhance professional development and student learning, and then digital age librarians. So I think it embraces what the book's about. I'm very into social media, into how it can connect us, how it can provide professional development and enhance student learning. So, the title's perfect.
Sure. Well, I'd like to go into a little bit of that aspect of the student learning. You and I were both at ISTE 2019, but I really sort of got to know more about you because I was researching our season 2 opener, which is advice for a first-year librarian and the rest of us. You wrote a blog post, and I don't think I think you actually revised it and reposted it because it's a great blog post, and it came out in August. And I'll include another link to it in my show notes with your blog. But you mentioned using Snapchat in the library with students, and I'm just going to throw my hands up in the air and say, you know what? Not in my school. I teach littles. My oldest students are 11. So could you tell me, how do you recommend using social media to, advance students' achievement?
Right. So here's the way that I look at it. And I know every school is different. But one of the things we are charged with is teaching good digital citizenship and how to be safe online. But when we're doing that in a canned online environment, they're not really learning how to work within a real life environment. So for instance, my granddaughter is 2 years old. As I'm teaching and navigating, like teaching her how to cross the street, to look both ways before you cross the street, what to look for, how to gauge the traffic, etc. If I did that through worksheets and reading a story and through online simulations, would I feel safe then sending her out on her own to cross the street, having never done it in real life? No. Mm-hmm. I think students need to work within a real life situation. And I've used Snapchat in both high school and with my littles, even my kinders. But here's how I've used it differently. At the high school level, what you want to do with whatever social media is, Snapchat's going to be gone soon. It's not even popular that much anymore. I've used Instagram. You meet your audience where they are. So with Snapchat at the high school level, it was a big thing when I was in a high school last. And I would use it to promote things about the library, to celebrate things that were happening in our library, to get the kids excited and involved in what they were doing and what their friends were doing in the library. And that's the way I look at social media, is it's a celebration. With the littles, I have library helpers in every single grade level, including kindergarten. They'd be the ones behind the circ desk taking care of everything that was a librarian would do. And when they got done doing those librarian tasks, then I would give them my cell phone with the Snapchat up and say, now your job is to go around, take pictures, and celebrate what's happening in the library, what kids are doing at the other centers, talking to them about you need to ask permission before you take their pictures. What are you going to say about this picture when you put the text in? Your sentence structure even, what are you going to say is happening here? Not just, oh, cool, man, do something more than that. How are you going to celebrate it out? And then if somebody doesn't want their picture taken, what can you do instead? How can you position that camera? And so giving them those opportunities, of course, they couldn't send it out. I had to always look at it and approve it. And what I would do is save it, have them save it to my camera roll. Mm-hmm. They could push it out through Snapchat, and then later on, I could use that picture saved to my camera roll to then push it out through Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to meet those audience needs of my parents and grandparents and PLN.
I think it speaks to some of the idea of giving the kids ownership of your library program, because the more invested they are, the more empowered they are in what happens in your program, the more likely they are to love coming to the library. And it really does enrich their own experience when they're there, because they feel like it truly reflects them and the things that they do.
Right. One of my big taglines, I'm sorry, but one of my big taglines that I have besides Connect, Share, Learn, and Grow is part of our job is to empower students to be masters of their own learning.
Wow.
And so we have to let go of the reins and let them learn.
I wish I could say, oh, I do that every day. I think that I can say from experience that that is a lovely, lofty goal. And if we can achieve that at any part in our day, then we are moving in the right direction.
Or month or year.
Yeah, you know what? I think we got to take it one class at a time, one grade at a time, and it isn't an all or nothing. We're not looking at a real binary situation here. We're like, you know what? If you tackle one particular grade level or one particular lesson and really revamp it so that this is something that you can feel really good about, I think that's a manageable way to work towards that goal. Can I ask, I do like your example that you said about, handing worksheets or helping your granddaughter. I know I have now myself trained 3 teenage drivers, and their biggest objection to drivers training was the work they had to do in the classroom. And it made absolutely no sense to sit there at a desk and watch frightening movies and write things down on paper when what they really needed to do was get behind the wheel. And there is a leap of faith you do when that happens. And I'm very glad to say I'm on this side, and all 3 of my children have driver's licenses. So we know that school librarians are uniquely positioned to be role models, both for our students in real life and how our students function online. What recommendations do you have either to those of us who are new in the profession and perhaps are younger, or those of us who are digital migrants, those of us who have been here long enough and are taking on these new digital realms, perhaps with a little bit of trepidation. What are your recommendations when it comes to being role models for our students?
Right. And I think we need to be in the space and using the space to be able to model it. I mean, we can talk about what's appropriate all day long, but if we're not willing to model it, how can we truly teach? But one thing I like doing to help model is when a kid comes to me and is like, oh, man, I really loved this book. It was so great. I'm like, hey, let's tweet the author. Let's see if that author's on Twitter or on Instagram, and let's tweet and tell them and take a selfie of you with the book. And they're like, we can do that? We can talk to the authors? And I'm like, yeah. And then when they actually respond back, the kids are just ecstatic that, oh my gosh, they're like talking to me. And so showing them that they do have that power within them, using this media instead of just being ugly or negative or just posting what you had for breakfast or any of those other things, it has a power to connect you with the world, and teaching and modeling that for them, because it's so crazy that they can look up, like my grandson who's 8, he can look up on YouTube how to play a certain game or do something in Minecraft or some other game that he plays. But so many kids don't apply that to school. Like, they're having trouble understanding a math problem. Go to YouTube, but they don't connect those two things.
Sure.
Modeling that knowledge.
I've one of my sons is very much into 3D printing, and when he ran into some troubles, I said, sweetheart, neither your dad nor I knew how to do 3D printing when we were 17 years old. And he said, that's okay, Mom, because there's a whole bunch of 3D printing discussion groups on Reddit, and specific to the 3D printer I'm using. So he found his community, and they could direct them to resources. And I think it shows a certain amount of ingenuity. But in this day and age, that kind of problem solving really is what our students, it needs to be encouraged with them.
Right.
Can I ask you, you mentioned in your book about anonymity. And this is I have struggled when I've tried to explain to the students that they may think they have some sort of anonymity online. And it doesn't help when I just sort of laugh at them and say, oh, you can think that, but you don't. But how do you convey that to your students? Because that really is something that needs to be dispelled, because students of all ages behave badly because they think this behavior cannot be traced back to them.
Right. That's a tough one, because like you said, you can tell them all day long till you're blue in the face, but they really don't think it can happen to them. I think more than anything, what it needs to come down to with those anonymous apps, like, it's not TikTok, that's a new one. Oh man, I can't remember the name of it. Yak something or another. Mm-hmm. Can't remember, where it was just within a certain radius you could post whatever you wanted to say within that particular radius. And It was used for a lot of online bullying. And I think more than anything, it needs to be the reaction of how the administration decides to handle that situation. And the knee-jerk reaction often is to just shut it all down. I'm going to just shut it down. I'm going to block it. We're not going to deal with this. But I was very fortunate to work at Hoover High School, where they really got and understood social media and how it could benefit kids. My 2 assistant principals, Jennifer Hogan and Holly Sutherland, are the moderators of Alabama Ed Chat. So they really understand about Twitter chats and the power within those. And social media was wide open in our school. So when it was Yik Yak. So when Yik Yak came around, you knew it was coming from within the school. And like I said, it was used for bullying. So instead of the knee-jerk reaction of, we're going to just shut this whole thing down or block it, what they did is they had students and teachers and our admin flooded Yik Yak with nothing but positive messages.
Oh,
constantly. Wow. Positive, until the people who were being negative were like, man, it's not worth it. Wow. And so putting a twist on that social media. And they did that with Twitter too, because they could pick up on, okay, this kid's very distressed, or I see a fight's about to break out over here, or this kid really put something super inappropriate online. And instead of, again, shutting it down or suspending them, they'd call those kids in and have a conversation, because it was a safe place in school where they could have that conversation before they were out in the adult world, where it'd cost them a job or have them put in jail or all sorts of other repercussions that then at that time you can't escape from. And so opening it up for those heavy conversations, but you're really saving those kids when, instead of blocking it and sticking your head in the sand. You're using it as an educational tool.
Sure. When I teach digital citizenship in my class, I'll be honest, I have not been nearly as courageous as you have been with handing over a Snapchat account and letting the kids document what we do. But we have had some really powerful conversations about oversharing, and to the extent to which we are putting way too much information out there and pointing to the adults in their lives and saying, look, your parents have been doing this for a long time. And so appreciating the fact that when you put those things out there, you can't take them back. And they're out there like a permanent marker. I refrain from using the word digital tattoo because introducing the word tattoo to a bunch of 10-year-olds creates a great deal of disturbance. And all I need is a parent email saying, why were you talking about tattoos in library? So I was curious. You mentioned in one of your chapters of your book that librarians being managers of social media for their school. Am I correct? I mean, you're referring to school librarians being the point person for the school's social media handles.
That can happen, but really what I do is I go out and I'll set up a social media for my library.
Okay.
And that's a celebration of what's happening in the student learning taking place in there.
Sure.
But what I also try to do is celebrate my teachers, what they're doing, celebrate my admin, celebrate the school as a whole. Because a lot of times your teachers aren't using social media, but they're doing amazing things in their classrooms and nobody knows about it because they're not in there. And so when you come across those opportunities to celebrate the awesomeness in your school, you should celebrate that awesomeness. And the best way to get it out is through social media or nobody knows.
Well, and I had an earlier conversation with Amanda Jones about this because she also talked about using social media. And I'll tell her, I'm old enough where I remember being in a school and administrators admonishing teachers for using social media. The difference was they were using personal accounts and not ones to promote their school programs. The idea of being on social media was a personal investment, not one in which we showcased our school program. So that was the big turnaround. And when districts started creating hashtags to share out with our families and let's be honest, with our tax base, the folks who are going to be supporting any sort of, tax initiatives and millages to support our public schools, especially, using social media is a very powerful way to get across to a great number of people. I did want to ask you, did you want to share? You just recently had a webinar with Follett. And I didn't know if that was something that you might be able to share with us, or you could hit the highlights, or what were some of the items that this particular webinar addressed?
Well, actually, it ties into exactly what you were just talking about with social media and getting that tax base and the people who are investing in your school and using that to get the message out. One thing we were definitely talking about in the Follett webinar was advocating for your library and how can you make sure that your library has a full-time certified librarian, that they have the budget that they need. And one thing we discussed was when you have that social media presence and you're telling the story of your library every day, I mean, honestly, how many times does an admin walk into your library? Not often. Mm-hmm. How many times do the teachers walk in? Not often, and when they do, it's that 1 second between classes when you sat down for the first time all day to breathe, and they walk in and lean on the circ desk and go, oh, it must be nice to be in a quiet library all day.
Yeah, my administrator walked in when I was sitting down to put the finishing touches on a newsletter. So it was the most inactive I had been all day. I was sitting at a desk. I was placing some book orders, and I was working on the newsletter that we share with the district. And I really, it couldn't have been it was just it wasn't reflective of the kind of dynamic teaching I do all day in my 6 classes with my 25 kids, each kid coming in 45 minutes at a time. And I'm like, now is when you walk in, is when I'm working on my newsletter.
Always. What do you do all day? You sit at your desk, really, on the computer? Are you playing solitaire? But no, so that's why I'm so passionate about social media, because you're telling the story of your library every single day. And as the word gets out, as parents are talking to each other, within earshot of your admin, and they're saying, oh, did you see what the library put on Facebook the other day? That looked like such a great activity. They start to take notice. They start watching that social media feed to see what's happening. And then they're more willing to fund programs or say, hey, let's take a look at this. Is this something you can do? I've had parents who have donated money and other items to the library because of what they've seen on the social media. Right. So, I mean, you're selling and advocating your case every single day when you're connecting with social media and celebrating what's happening.
Well, and I think that it only raises up our program and gives it a higher profile. And and again, when the community can see all the good that's being done, what we really are doing is dispelling some of those preconceptions that a generation of people might have come to understand what gets done in the library. And when you show them something very different I'm sure that it's a very compelling picture that you're portraying. Can you tell us, I really appreciate you taking time out this evening to talk with us. Tell us where we can find you on social media, because I found you, and it was really helpful, again, that I really enjoyed reading your blog posts, and give us an idea where we can find you.
I had to blame Gwyneth Jones for all this. If you don't know Gwyneth Jones, she's just one of the most amazing librarians ever. And she was really one of the driving forces that kept pushing me from the very beginning when I was just starting to emerge and poke my head out to see what was happening. And she was like, go, go, go. And she was like, you have to brand yourself. And so you can pretty much find me anywhere with @Nikki D. Robertson. And that's all thanks to Gwyneth, because she would not shut up until I branded myself.
I think what this tells me is that you have the good sense to listen to the people around you who want what's best, and to make sure that all the good things that you're doing aren't just having this small local impact, that you are able to bring this kind of enthusiasm to our profession. And that's important to hear. And I can't think of somebody better to be on this podcast than somebody such as yourself. It really does give us all an idea of the kinds of things that you do every day. And even better yet, we can listen to it and take what we learn and apply it to our own school programs. So I really want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. And I look forward to our paths crossing in the future.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy. It's been a pleasure. And let me just say, I'm so proud of you for what you're doing and podcasting and stepping out there and being brave. That's what it takes, is just stepping out there and being brave. And we're here to support you 100%.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Have a great evening.
You too.
I am so very grateful to Nikki D. Robertson, whose perspectives and sharing her time with us really made this episode so meaningful. I'd also like to thank you, the listeners, whose feedback helps plan the direction of upcoming episodes. I welcome you and everyone to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions on Facebook or Twitter, or on our email address, schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. If you enjoyed listening to today's episode, I hope that you would share that out with your friends, fellow school librarians, and your PLN. The topic of our next episode will be RIP, our biography sections, where we delve into the unique challenges of weeding and maintaining this part of our collection. I hope you will tune in.